When we look at Executive Order 12803, Infrastructure Privatization, we read in Section 1, Definitions, for purposes of this order, A, privatization means the disposition or transfer of an infrastructure asset, such as by sale or by long-term lease from a state or local government to a private party. In other words, the selling of taxpayer-funded infrastructure to private corporations or individuals. B, infrastructure asset means any asset financed in whole or in part by the federal government, in other words, taxpayer money, and needed for the functioning of the economy. Examples of such assets include, but are not limited to, roads, tunnels, etc. And D, transfer price means the amount paid or to be paid by a private party for an infrastructure asset if the asset is transferred as a result of a competitive bidding. This, my friends, is why the carpool lanes on your freeways and highways have turned into toll roads that you must pay to use. A private corporation now leases or owns those lanes, either outright or through public-private partnerships or PPPs, despite being built with your taxpayer monies. This is also why closed-circuit TV cameras are now mounted just about everywhere you look, monitoring your every move at every major intersection that you cross. This is why the parking police in Hollywood are actually part of a private corporation based in New York City that only hires minorities and who takes no oath to the Constitution. This is why the parking meters in downtown Chicago now cost $27 to park for only half an hour. They were sold off and leased to private enterprises. And this is why your gas, electric, sewer, trash, and other utility prices are going through the roof. Privatization means deregulation. Deregulation means no limitations on pricing due to the monopolistic authority granted by the state through these partnerships. This is the privatization of America, referred to above as infrastructure privatization. This is corporate fascism, rule by corporate government proxy. This is the corporatization of the United States. In another article by Iantha Jean Dugan, entitled Facing Budget Gaps, Cities Sell Parking, Airports, Zoo, she writes, cities and states across the nation are selling and leasing everything from airports to zoos, a fire sale that could help plug budget holes now but worsen their financial woes over the long run. California is looking to shed state office buildings. Milwaukee has proposed selling its water supply. In Chicago and New Haven, Connecticut, it's parking meters. In Louisiana and Georgia, airports are up for grabs. Many governments are using asset sales to balance budgets ravaged by declines in tax revenues and unfunded pensions. In recent congressional testimony, billionaire investor Warren Buffett said he worried about how municipalities will pay for public workers' retirement and health benefits and suggested that the federal government may ultimately be compelled to bail out states. Remember, a bailout means a purchase. Some properties are being sold at fire sale prices into a weak market. The deal means cities are giving up long-term, recurring income streams in exchange for lump sum payments to plug one-time budget gaps. The current deals are fundamentally different because control of the asset transfers to private hands. The most popular deals in the works are metered municipal street and garage parking spaces. One of the first was Chicago, where the city received $1.16 billion in 2008 to allow a consortium led by Morgan Stanley to run more than 36,000 metered parking spaces for 75 years. The city continues to set the rules and rates for the meters and collect the parking fines, but the investors keep the revenues, which this year will more than triple the $20 million the city was collecting, according to credit rating firms. In other words, if you live in Chicago, Morgan Stanley is charging you for parking on the streets that your fathers built. Based on the new rates, the Inspector General claimed the city was shortchanged by about $1 billion. The investors will make their money back in 20 years, and we are stuck for 50 more years making $0. Around the country, at least a dozen public parking systems are up for bid, including in San Francisco and Las Vegas. In Pittsburgh, the mayor is proposing to lease out the parking system for an upfront sum of about $300 million over 50 years and funnel the money back into the pension system. But the city will ultimately lose $3.5 billion over the life of the lease. And guess which group will ultimately have to make up that deficit? You got it. You, the taxpayer. So just what is corporatism? The word corporation is derived from the Latin word corpus, which translates into English as body. Formal corporatist models are based upon the contract of corporate groups such as agriculture, business, ethnic, labor, military, patronage, scientific, or religious affiliations into a collective body. There's that word again, collective. For instance, all individual Methodist churches pay the main corporate church, which is indeed a for-profit corporation, with each of their individual 501c3 houses of worship across the country and the world acting as their non-profit branches. This is why all denominations hold general conferences. They are nothing but giant corporate budget meetings. In this way, churches can be regulated by the state. Yes, churches are corporations. And yet, almost humorously, we demand our Bill of Rights and the right to our freedoms of religion as we sit and assemble at corporate houses of worship that have been infiltrated by greed and usury. All the while not comprehending that the Constitution we hold so dear provides for not only religious freedom, free of corporate tyranny and control, but for the freedom to peacefully assemble without government interference and without taxation of any kind. Nonprofit status for churches is a redundancy that is both repugnant and absolutely unnecessary. This is the corporatization of God. And yes, the military, as a government-owned entity, as a constitutionally forbidden standing army, is a corporately held private world police force, currently guarding poppy seeds in Afghanistan, oil fields in Iraq, and having bases of operation in just about every country in the world. This is the state of the corporate military today, to protect and serve the continuity of the government, or the corporation. This is the corporatization of war. This age-old recipe of corporatism and fascism has been utilized by most ideologies across the political spectrum, including absolutism, capitalism, conservatism, fascism, liberalism, progressivism, reactionism, social democracy, socialism, and syndicalism. Churches throughout history, including Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, have set up and continue to adhere to corporatist structures. Interestingly, the idea of a central bank is actually one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. And indeed, all of these Marxist ideals of how to turn a government into a communist state have been made into law in the United States federal government through executive orders, presidential directives, acts of Congress, and other legislation. Equally as intriguing, the term democracy is actually a communist term, completely opposite of the constitutional idealism of a republic. The difference? Simply stated, democracy is a majority rule. So, if 51% of the people get what they want, then 49% of the people get something they don't want. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep sitting down to discuss dinner plans.